Welcome everyone to Richey May's Cybersecurity Trends in the Mortgage Industry webinar today. We'll begin in just a moment. Welcome everyone again. For those of you that do not know Richey May, we have been founded over 35 years ago and we go deep into mortgage banking. What that means is that we were founded to specialize in mortgage banking, and this enables us to really understand the market and our clients in very unique ways. Our strength is looking ahead for our clients, and this webinar today is evidence of that. Michael Nouguier is our Director of Cybersecurity Services. And in just a moment, he's going to give you an update on what's happening right now that you need to know. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Michael. Oh, first, housekeeping. I know that many of you will have the question of whether or not this slide deck and recording will be sent to you, and the answer is yes. In 1 to 2 business days, you will have this entire package of the slides and the recording. We will also save time for some questions for Michael at the end. And please stay tuned to give us a quick survey after this webinar so we can make sure that we're answering your needs. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my camera here for just a minute so that you know that I'm a real person and I will be presenting this live here. We are going to talk again, as stated before, on cybersecurity trends in the mortgage industry. My name is Michael Nouguier. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Richey May, as well as the Director of Cybersecurity Services. I have over 20 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity, spanning multiple different industries, including government, financial services, media and entertainment, manufacturing, automobiles, and the like. And so I bring that experience here to Richey May to drive our knowledge into our unique industry experience within the mortgage banking industry. I am in lovely Colorado. It is a beautiful fall day today, blue skies, gorgeous trees changing colors. So I hope all of you are experiencing some great weather as well as we're transitioning into fall and then soon into winter. Today's agenda is going to go over what is cybersecurity. We're going to define cybersecurity. We're going to touch on some of the top trends in the mortgage industry, what we're seeing, right? There are some unique intricacies within the mortgage industry from a cybersecurity perspective that we want to touch on. We're going to dissect what a cyber attack is, look at the anatomy of a cyber attack and how that impacts the mortgage industry, the impacts of a breach, and then go through some best practices. And we're going to spend the meat of the time on that best practices. So that we can understand what we can do within the current climate of the mortgage industry to protect our organizations. And then we'll have some time left over for some Q&A. And so I'm going to stop sharing my camera now so that you can see this presentation and focus on the content therein. Alrighty. So we'll start off with what is cybersecurity? And there's this definition here on the board. Pardon me. It's the practice of protecting your systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks by utilizing people, processes, and technology. And really that's to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information, assets, and data so that your organization can thrive and function. There's often a conversation within cybersecurity about functionality versus higher security. And so what we want to focus on rather than functionality or higher security is how we're protecting the confidentiality, that integrity, and that availability of the data and the assets inside of your organization so that your customers, your business can thrive knowing that that is protected. We'll touch more on that triangle in the bottom left-hand corner here as we move forward into best practices. But that's the best definition that I could derive for cybersecurity. and what it takes to be secure. We'll dive into cybersecurity trends now, and I really boiled this down to 4 trends that I'm seeing within the industry right now. And some of the biggest ones that, as I'm talking to our clients, as I'm spending time sitting with CISOs and privacy and compliance professionals of what they're seeing, what their concerns are moving forward into the future. And so some big hits here. Obviously, ransomware is a concern of every organization from small to large. It is one of the most popular attacks, so much so that over the last several years, it's grown in popularity exponentially, and it's popular because it is effective. And so we'll touch a little on ransomware. Moving forward, BEC, that is business email compromise, and that is especially in the financial industry, mortgage banking, credit unions. Um, and the like. It is starting to become one of the most popular attack vectors. Email is how we live day to day. It is the most utilized form of communication now in businesses, and so business email compromise. We're going to dissect that, see what it is, and understand how it impacts organizations financially. And even from a business to business perspective. Cyber insurance, the new trend here. We'll talk a little bit about what I used to see when I was buying cyber insurance 2 decades ago to today. I put in here, it's the new life insurance. If anybody's applied for life insurance in the past, right, you've had to get a physical, blood tests, and the same is true for cyber insurance, right? Your organization goes through a lot of scrutiny there, and we'll touch on that. And then volatility. There's a lot of market volatility over the last 6 to 8 months. A lot has changed in the housing market and the mortgage banking industry, and that volatility opens up opportunity and vulnerability within organizations. And so we're going to touch on what that is and how to remain secure through industry fluctuation. Pardon me. I'm going to take a sip here. All right, first on the list is ransomware as a trend. What is ransomware? It's helpful to define it. Ransomware is a form of malicious software designed to block access to computer systems or data within your environment until a sum of money is paid. It used to be just cold hard cash that was really traceable. Now we're seeing it in ransom in the form of cryptocurrency, and these cyber attackers and these cyber ransomware gangs, as we're calling them, are requiring cryptocurrency in many different forms. Bitcoin used to be the most requested, but some will request it in other currencies as well. Ransomware is often initiated or often started through a social engineering campaign to gain access to an organization. Social engineering is the most common attack vector for any cyber attack. It's the initiation point. And as we start to dive into the anatomy of a cyber attack, we're going to understand why social engineering is so popular. Ransomware isn't just pay us a sum and we'll give you your data back and both parties walk away, right? I think that is the idea, but right, we often see double and triple extortion tactics from these gangs. And so, right, you've paid to get your data back. That's great. We still have a copy of your data and we're going to leak it on the dark web unless you give us more money. And so you give more money and they say, all right, and we're not going to leak it on the dark web, but we are going to target your customer base of the data that we stole from them and let them know that we have their data. And we're going to ask them for money to protect their data unless you pay us more. And so you're starting to see this extortion really drive deep, right, into this type of an attack and really hold organizations' feet to the flame when ransomware does happen. And so rather than preparing for paying a ransom, right, and having cyber insurance to help cover the cost there, because brand damage is hard to appoint a financial figure to, a monetary figure to, right? We want to focus on this prevention of ransomware in organizations, and we'll talk about that in our best practices. One statistic that really sticks out to me is that 12% of organizations are able to recover their data without paying a ransom, which is a very low number, and 34% of organizations that have actually paid ransom in the last year didn't actually recover their data. They didn't get it back. And so, right, there's no telling if you do pay that you will get it back. A new ransomware attack occurs every 14 seconds. So during this presentation, attacks on organizations are happening consistently. 75% on average around that, right? 3 out of 4 businesses in the small to mid-size, mid-enterprise space will be forced to close their doors due to a ransomware attack. The statistic increased significantly over the last year due to the amount of damage from ransomware attacks. The next point here, banking and finance are the most targeted industries for ransomware cyber attacks because that is where money flows in and out the most. There is not a healthcare risk there, and so we tend to see cyber attackers target the banking and finance industries the most. The estimated cost of ransomware, and I know it looks like a typo on here, you can't really see the cross out. The estimated cost of ransomware in 2022 for organizations is $20 billion worldwide. So it is a very large industry for cyber attackers to focus on because they are making money. They are able to be successful in this. Over the last year, 42% of small businesses experienced a cyber attack related to ransomware, and 82% of ransomware attacks are targeting small businesses now. It used to be that they were targeting larger enterprises, but I think they've started to understand that small businesses have the most to lose now. They also have the lack of budget and focus on their cybersecurity controls, and so it's a lot easier entry point for a successful ransomware attack. We'll move on from ransomware. Again, if you have questions, feel free to chat those over. I will be answering some questions after the fact. I'll also have my contact information at the end. If you do have questions and don't feel like asking on the webinar, you can shoot me an email, send me a phone call, text. I even can read smoke signals. So feel free to send those across, and I'll answer them accordingly. So market volatility, right? We've seen a huge shift in the mortgage industry, rates increasing, which has led to a downturn in the industry from the number of people wanting to buy houses, right? It is a lot more appealing to buy a house at 2%. I don't have to explain that to this industry, we all understand. But what that does create is an opportunity for cyber attackers, right? Cyber attackers can mimic email addresses, send out phishing campaigns saying, "Hey, we're sub 5% on interest rates right now, or we're sub 4% on interest rates. Click here to start the loan process," right? And so it creates this opportunity for attackers to attack individuals, also attack inside of an organization, right? And with this type of market volatility, we do see staff reductions across the board from every business unit within an organization, including the security staff. So that can lead to an increase of fraud, social engineering, and specifically insider threats, right? As people have access to your organization's data, they can take that data with them if we're not providing the right type of protection mechanisms and policies to prevent that from happening. In 2021, victim losses totaled around $6.9 billion in the mortgage banking industry alone. Related to fraud and social engineering, business email compromise, and insider threats. From a fraud perspective, there were 552,000 complaints last year, and it has only increased year over year. That's over 2,300 complaints per day, but the minimum that we're seeing on some days, even including Sundays, right? And this is to the FBI reporting center, is around 2,300 complaints per day, which is just astronomical. And so as data is getting stolen from organizations in the heavily regulated industry of mortgage banking, we see that there are fines associated with that and costs per record that are usually levied. And so on average, a cost per record stolen of PII, personally identifiable information, is around $175 in the financial industry. And so right. I've seen news stories where millions of records were stolen from X organization. I'm not going to call any organizations out on this webinar, but right, if you think about that, 2.5 million records stolen from one organization could be a disastrous amount of money from a price per record perspective. We'll move on to discuss business email compromise. What is business email compromise? And I have a fun graphic on the next slide that that can kind of explain it a little better. But there are two types of business email compromise. One where your email has been hacked and people are emailing from you, and one where your email is being mimicked. And so if you work for acme.com and somebody creates an email address at acmee.com and sends it out in a similar format to what you currently have, right? That is the second form, right? Where it's mimicking, but it's not actually attacking or hacked into your email. And so a cyber attacker will mimic an email to try and gain some form of payment through email. It's typically through fake invoicing or a wire transfer that needs to happen, something along those lines. And like I said, it usually gets initiated from a social engineering perspective, right? A social engineering email is sent out, somebody clicks on it and sends their credentials across. And when that happens, somebody can then get access to your email. Some protections against this are really just constant vigilance, right? Making sure that you're training your organization to identify this, right? Most people are targeted in these types of attacks, and so they're sending it to the people that do actually pay invoices, but making sure that you're paying attention to the wording in the email, the grammar that's being utilized, the email addresses this is coming from. Are you expecting it, right? Testing your organization through your own internal or third-party phishing tests to make sure that as people are clicking on this, they're getting training to understand where they could improve in identifying phishing tests. And creating thoughtful policies and processes, right? Instead of paying an invoice when one is requested to be paid to a new ACH, right? If it's over a certain amount, having multiple eyes on it, calling the other the receiving party and saying, hey, are you expecting this invoice to be paid right now? We're going to pay it right now. Did you send us the email? I wanted to validate the wiring information or the ACH information. And there are actually technologies that can assist in blocking these emails from coming in when they are not from an actual email compromise, but a mimicking third party or cyber attacker. And so here is the graphic I was talking about. A cyber criminal mimics, in this case, a senior executive and emails the finance department and says, hey, I need you to wire X amount of funds from our account into this bank account at this place. Not always an uncommon request, but right, the finance department doesn't want to inconvenience a C-level executive, and so they go ahead and do that. Cyber criminal receives the funds from that. And so thoughtful policies in this place would be, hey, I'm going to pick up the phone and call the executive or text the executive and say, hey, did you request funds to be sent out? This actually happened to me the other day where my CFO, quote unquote, texted me and said, hey, I need you to meet me, or I need you to do something for me. And I sit right across from the CFO. And so I looked at the CFO's office and was like, did you just text message me asking me to do something for you? And he said, no, that's not my phone number. So, right, just thoughtful communication is really the biggest protector in this particular use case. And we'll be walking through some best practices for your organization in just a minute as well. And then cyber insurance, right? As a trend, cyber insurance has been a really helpful expense for a lot of organizations over the last several years, helping them weather a cyber attack or a breach. When I first started purchasing cyber insurance in my career for organizations that I had worked for, that cyber insurance was an afterthought. It was an add-on to a liability policy. All right, I was able to purchase several $1 million for $500 a year because it was just an add-on. Cyber attacks, right, weren't really the biggest of deals 20 years ago, and they've increased in their sophistication over time. And so, right, $500, several $1 million, that's a great policy to have. just from year over year, from 2021 to Q1 of 2022, Marsh McLennan, a large insurance broker, released some statistics saying that rates increased 110% just in the first quarter of 2022 alone. And so we're starting to see policies segmented from general liability. They're purposefully just for cybersecurity alone, and their rates are massively different year over year. Right, sometimes doubling, maybe even tripling, depending on the posture of your organization. And not only that, but deductibles are starting to be implemented as well, 10, 20% of the overall coverage, depending on what type of attack you're getting. And so those increased rates are making it harder to procure cyber insurance and harder to expense or accept that kind of expense in organizations. I was sitting on a CISO panel a couple weeks ago, and about 40% of the CISOs sitting in this room, there were about 30 of us, raised their hand and said, we're foregoing cyber insurance in an effort to save money, but also self-insure. So we're thinking about this differently because the cost is not justified, or we can't get cyber insurance, right? Denial is the next biggest trend in the cybersecurity industry, and that's where organizations are starting to see that their cyber insurers are considering them too risky to cover, which is why I call this the new life insurance, right? If you have risky behavior in life, your life insurance will not want to cover you. And as such, in the realm of cybersecurity, if there is too much risk for the insurer to take on, it makes it very difficult for them to actually want to insure you. And I have seen denials come more often than not in organizations. And so the next step is to how can we reduce our risk and increase our cyber insurance coverage. 10, 15, 20 years ago when I was buying cyber insurance, all I had to do was say that I wanted it, I'd sign on the dotted line, and then I would get it. Now there are self-assessments and questionnaires coming across asking, what are you doing in these areas to protect your organization? Answering those questions wrong or falsely answering those questions can lead to a lack of coverage, no coverage. If the policy has gotten in, if you do receive the policy and an attack happens outside of the answers that you put on that self-assessment, your request can be denied in the future. And so, right, constant vigilance and building a cybersecurity program, building that culture of security inside your environment, your organization is really what's going to help increase the ability to get cyber insurance if that's an initiative for your organization. And then the last point on cyber insurance is really this restrictive coverage, right? In the past, it was if you get breached, this is what you get, X million dollars to help cover you from these things. Now they break it down with tons and tons of amendments and exclusions, and right, oftentimes fraud and ransomware can be excluded from the policy or require subsequent questionnaires and subsequent riders in order to be included inside of your cybersecurity policy. So in receiving a cyber insurance policy, reviewing it from a legal perspective and reviewing it from a coverage perspective are recommended. Right, I assist organizations all the time in just understanding what is being covered and what terminology is being used and what that means for them as an organization. And so that's something to consider as you're getting your next cyber insurance policy renewal. So we're going to move on from trends and talk about the anatomy of a cyber attack. I usually joke and say there's going to be a quiz on this. This is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It documents the entirety of every possible known way that an organization can be attacked, from reconnaissance all the way to the impact that will happen to the organization. And so each one of these, and I'll move my mouse here, that has a gray box next to it expands several more times throughout this. And so there are several hundred possibilities and routes for cyber attackers to take that we map to this framework to understand where to protect our organization as we're identifying risks in our organization. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is a standard now in the cybersecurity world to understand weaknesses and areas of improvement inside your organization. I'm not going to walk through this in detail right now, because what I have done is I have simplified it and used SmartArt and PowerPoint to make this a lot easier, right? Of what the anatomy of a cyber attack actually looks like and what that means to every person who's not a cybersecurity professional, right? What is happening? The number one thing that happens from a cyber attack is recon. We don't, I stopped talking about myself as a cyber attacker. Cyber attackers do not just hope to get lucky and stumble across things. They are consistently performing reconnaissance on the internet to identify where to attack, why to attack, when to attack. Most sophisticated attacks, or all sophisticated attacks, start with this recon phase. And you'd be shocked to find out that most of this recon is happening with simple Google searches, customized Google searches, looking at social media. LinkedIn is a great place to network as a professional. It's also a treasure trove of information. And so a lot of recon happens on social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, there's a million places you can be social on the internet at this point, and so that recon is really there. And so a great stopping point in the cyber attack kill chain is locking your profile down so that it's not publicly accessible. If people want to become your friend, you have to review that and allow that, and make sure that your profile is private unless you accept somebody as a contact on LinkedIn, Facebook, all these different social media platforms. From there, they craft an initial compromise, typically through social engineering, right? Where they will send you an email to try and get you to click a link or download an attachment that is malicious. Other opportunities in the initial compromise are trying to exploit public vulnerabilities in your public-facing organization's internet. So your firewalls, your websites, whatever it might be. We've seen this a lot through Russian campaigns in the last couple of weeks, where they've attacked certain websites. They took down a handful of airport websites. I think O'Hare was taken down. The state of Colorado, colorado.gov website was taken down through public attack. So that's the initial compromise, right? Typically, that social engineering is the way to go, right? Because it's a lot easier to send out 150 emails and get somebody to click on it than it is to find those public vulnerabilities and exploit them. And so once we've gained credentials or somebody has clicked on our attachment in their email, then that moves us to the persistence and control stage, where once we get the access to those credentials, we're going to try and get as much access from that point moving forward, so that if anything were to happen, somebody changes their password or they realize that they want to implement MFA, we're going to try and get as far as we can as quickly as possible. And maintain that persistence and control. Maybe somebody goes on vacation, their computer's not available anymore from the malicious payload that we loaded on their system. And so, right, we want to make sure to expand across the organization as much as possible. Now that we're inside of an organization and we have access, we have credentials, right? That's where we craft that exploitation from a malicious perspective. What are we going to exploit in this? Are we going to deploy ransomware? Are we going to steal data for our benefit? Are we going to send emails to customers to have them pay invoices to a fraudulent bank account? Something along those lines, right? We're crafting our attack in that exploitation phase. And then once that is kicked off, we will have hit our objective and caused an impact inside that organization. This is the simplest breakdown of a cyber attack from my perspective, moving for anybody to understand. And so along each of these points here, each of these circles, there is the ability for an individual to stop a cyber attack. From the recon phase, right? Let's make sure that we're applying a thoughtful and secure approach to the data that we're sharing externally. From the initial compromise, if we're training and we're staying vigilant, we can block these social engineer attacks. If we're patching our systems inside of our organization, doing vulnerability management best practices, which we'll all talk about here in a second. From a persistence and control, do we have the right technologies to monitor anomalies inside of our organization for persistence and control and exploitation, right? If we see that somebody is loading lots of software or transitioning or transferring a lot of data outbound of our network, right, what controls do we have to identify those anomalies and shut them down? So along this entire kill chain, there is something that we can do to prevent that and implement incident response best practices. I'll move on from there to talk about the impacts of a breach. So that anatomy of that cyber attack has taken place inside your organization. What are the impacts if they've hit their control objectives and impacted your organization? Well, the top four are really this reputational damage, right? If customers are impacted, your customers are impacted, they get a notification, right? Especially in the mortgage banking industry, and the privacy laws that are being passed. I think there are currently 3 states with privacy laws, California, Colorado, and Virginia, that are in effect now, and there are several more coming up in the next year that are requiring notification. NYDFS also requires specific notification alongside of the NYAG, the Attorney General's office. And so that forces an organization to notify their customer base if there has been a breach. That causes reputational damage. Most 5 years ago, as an organization experiencing a breach, customers would rather go elsewhere than utilize your services. Breaches are becoming really common, and so that percentage of customers leaving your organization is dropping, but there's still damage there. There's still a cost to that reputational damage. Business interruption. And so if an attack takes down a public-facing web server, if you're a small business, and the entry point for all of your customers is through a web application like a login, or the sales aspect of it. I always like to say you're a small business and you sell widget X. Amazon also sells a similar widget, but people want to shop local or shop small business, right? If your website goes down, they're not going to wait for it to come back up. They're going to go to Amazon and get it with 2-day shipping, right? That business interruption causes a massive financial impact to organizations, right? The average downtime per minute inside of organizations, and so this is across the spectrum from small to enterprise, is about $5,600 a minute. And so if you think about that, if your website goes down for a handful of minutes and you lose that traction inside of your organization, or you can't provide services during that time, you are losing money, income throughout that process. And so that business interruption is something to take into mind. Legal and regulatory costs. We talked a little bit about regulatory costs. There are also legal fees, right? If you lose somebody's data, right? We're starting to see this with the Privacy Acts. There are fines levied for them, starting at the $100 range and moving all the way up to the 10 million euro range from a GDPR perspective, right? If there's gross negligence in that, the legal fees are expansive. And then technical recovery costs. If you are ransomware or there is some form of cyber attack inside of your organization that causes damage to your systems, recovering from that takes time and can require the purchase of new hardware, software, cloud storage, whatever it might be. And those are the 4 greatest impacts from a cyber attack. I'll move forward here to just post some statistics. This comes from the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report for 2022. And the average cost of a breach, you can see it increasing for most industries. Healthcare is obviously the highest cost of the highest regulated with HIPAA, right? And then coming in second here is the financial industry, with an average cost of a breach in around $6 million, which increased a couple $100,000 year over year. And we're expecting that to keep increasing for the time being year over year, as cyber attackers are starting to catch on to what is most vulnerable inside of each of these industries. With that, there is some good news, right? The cost of being prepared. Out of this same report from IBM and the Ponemon Institute, the cost of a data breach report, on average, organizations save 30% on the cost of a breach, if the breach even makes it to the point of a breach, by defining an incident response team, which is not just made up of technical people. It is made up of marketing, legal, executives, risk, privacy, and compliance throughout the organization, business owners, right? If you define that incident response team, create a plan, and then test that plan throughout the year, once or twice a year is usually good enough to provide you the capability to respond to an incident faster, And so rather than testing it during an actual breach, testing it about some sample breaches, like what happens if we were to get ransomware and this person's on vacation, you really get to exercise that muscle inside your organization, and it can lead to a 30% cost savings, or around $2.5 million off the average cost of a breach, because you are able to effectively respond. And I hear in my head all the time my father saying, failing to plan is planning to fail. This is one of those situations where doing a little due diligence can really drive a more impactful response if something were to happen inside your organization. Now we're going to dive into best practices, and I'm going to stick here for a while. Looks like we've got some time left, and so we're going to talk about what to do inside your organization to really build this culture of cybersecurity. What it takes to have a cybersecurity program in your environment, and a lot of this is being required now from cyber insurance and from regulators, from the FFIEC, whatever governing aspect and regulation and compliance there is, right? A lot of these things are consistent across the board. They all use similar frameworks. And so we'll talk about that here. The first thing you need to do is define a program, right? Rather than building one out and just starting to go after whatever, define the program, define what's important in it, make sure that there is leadership buy-in with that, and make sure that you're documenting it, right? If it doesn't exist on paper, it doesn't exist. And when you document that, people can review that document within the organization. Your employees, your staff can understand that there is a program and there are things that are required for the protection of your consumers' data. Building a steering committee is always helpful, made up of different business leaders. We like to call them champions across all the different business units, right? The success of a cyber program really hinges on the buy-in from the entire business. Building policies and procedures, starting with templates and starting to mature those over time. Some of those policies and procedures are acceptable use policies, a security policy and program, a plan for security, and what that looks like over 2 to 5 years as the business grows. So should the security within the organization to meet that growth. One of the things I always like to bring up is right, without computers, right, your organization would have failed throughout the 80s and 90s, right? Without a website, your organization was going to fail because they didn't have the proper marketing through the 90s and the dot-com era. Once the 2000s hit and Facebook was created, right, a social media presence is really required for an organization to be successful or to drive a greater success. And now we're in the 2020s, and cybersecurity has to be that focus in order to drive growth in your organization. And so having a cybersecurity program within your organization helps drive that growth. As a lot of vendors, a lot of customers are requiring certain cybersecurity posture before they move forward with partnering with you or becoming a customer. And we see that all the time with cybersecurity questionnaires, cyber insurance, so forth and so on. As a part of the cybersecurity program, defining the security roles and responsibilities, that's just not the cybersecurity and IT staff and what roles they have, but also the roles across the different business units. And then making sure that there is a qualified individual within your organization. This is typically a requirement through FFIEC, the FTC, through a lot of these governing bodies. They're requiring now a qualified individual, somebody with experience, certification within cybersecurity, to be the leader of the cybersecurity program. Once your program is defined, the first step, and what I always like to say is, if I have $1 to spend on cybersecurity, the first thing I want to spend that on is visibility. If you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. And so that's why this quote is in here. You need to know what you have in order to protect it, right? If there are shadow IT systems inside your environment or different business units, procuring software, hardware, cloud solutions without driving through the security program, it's impossible to protect that. And that opens up an attack surface that is unmanaged within the cybersecurity program within your environment. So getting this visibility and then documenting it, right? Understanding what systems, hardware, cloud, what softwares you have or that are required to run as a business, making sure those are documented and then managed from a vulnerability perspective. Oftentimes, software creates a vulnerability within an environment and often needs consistent updates. And so storing this in what we call a CMDB or configuration management database, and then managing the exposure and the attack surface that comes from these systems and software. We always recommend that organizations scan and document all vulnerabilities within their environment and then remediate and patch those vulnerabilities as well. And that helps maintain this constant vigilance and constant visibility within your environment. Once you have that visibility, it's time to assess. And this assessment process can help uncover where there are gaps in your visibility as well. Conduct a maturity and risk self-assessment. I included here a link that goes to an Excel spreadsheet to ask some questions inside your organization. And so when this is shared across, feel free to click that and use that Excel spreadsheet to understand how you align with the NIST CSF. And the NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The CSF is the cybersecurity framework built by them, right? And that is a foundation for the FFIEC. It's a foundation for a lot of regulatory bodies. So HIPAA, a lot of these other ones require or don't require, but utilize this NIST CSF as a baseline to their security controls and requirements. And then after you perform a self-assessment, utilizing a third party to perform that risk assessment and that maturity assessment annually helps drive a greater visibility into that, because an unbiased third party coming in is going to understand a little about the organization coming in and is going to be focused on aligning the risk across the organization and the maturity towards the NIST cybersecurity framework. The NIST cybersecurity framework, as you can see here in this graphic, is broken down into 5 key areas that they're focused on for an organization. That's identifying your assets. As you can see, it's the first thing that they recommend here, is that really gaining that visibility. Once you've identified your risk and your assets inside of your environment, then you can protect it, how to protect it, right? Once it's protecting, you can start to detect anomalies and events within your environment. And once you detect those, you can respond. And once you respond, you can recover. And so that's there's an actual cyclical process with this that they recommend. And so aligning with that helps continuously mature your cybersecurity program. I'll move forward here to focus on resiliency. Now that you've assessed your environment, you have a documented cybersecurity program, and you've gained visibility within your environment, focusing on resiliency. How can we weather a cyber attack, a breach, an incident within our environment? And this is really comes down to the 3 core principles: disaster recovery, business continuity, and incident response. Disaster recovery focuses more on environmental disasters, other disasters that could happen outside of technical disasters inside of your environment. Sometimes it includes those technical disasters as well. But what happens if there's a hurricane and we can't get access to our systems in Florida, right? That was a very real disaster that happened this year alone, and it happens every several years as well. Business continuity. Now that we've recovered from a disaster, how can we maintain continuity of our business during a disaster, during an incident, whatever it might be? And what is that plan? And this, again, is not always purely technical. It can span across business disasters, market downturns, whatever it might be. And then how to respond to an incident. And this focuses more on technical incidents, in my opinion. And so what happens if ransomware hits our environment? How are we going to respond to that? What playbooks are we going to run? Who are we going to utilize? What are our trusted third parties to help us recover from that? Again, back to the failing to plan is planning to fail, right? Perform tabletop exercises that test all 3 of these, right? Your disaster recovery posture, your business continuity, and your incident response plans and playbooks. Performing those once or twice a year really helps build a greater maturity to alleviate the impact of any of these breaches if they were to ever happen inside your organization. Data security. This is what we talked about at the beginning, right? It's right. What is the most valuable resource in the world, right? Data. It just surpassed oil and gas in the last couple years as the most valuable resource, and so protecting that comes down to these 3 core items, right? Data is secure if you can protect and maintain the confidentiality of it, the integrity of it, and the availability of it. So I always like to use a hospital example, right? If I'm in the hospital, I need my data to be secure, right? That's just a requirement anywhere. I need to make sure that the data about me, my medical record, is true, right? If somebody can edit that and it is not true, then it lacks integrity, and that could lead to an issue for my health, right? And I need to make sure that that data is actually available in a timely manner, right? If there is something happening in an emergency and they can't get the data about me that they need, right? Maybe I'm allergic to a medication, right? If that's not available in a timely manner, that could lead to a very severe impact on my life. And so those are the three core principles for data security. And when we talk about protecting that, we want to talk about what we're doing with data in transit, data at rest, and data in use, as well as the destruction of data. So when we are sending data across, is it encrypted, right? I don't want to send a personally identifiable information, social security numbers, and bank statements across plain email unencrypted, because that can be intercepted, right? And so data in transit, how we're sending it, how we're transitioning that needs to be through secure areas, especially in the mortgage banking industry. 10 years ago, when I got one of my first mortgages ever, I typed in my social. They asked me to type in my social security number via email and send it across to them on email. I was a little apprehensive to do that and asked for secure storage, and so that for me led to the use of a mortgage company that had secure practices in place that allowed me to protect my data alongside of them to protect my data. Once that data is sent to a mortgage company, how are they storing it? Is it being stored on somebody's computer? Are they putting it on a thumb drive and just walking away? Or is it being stored in a secure area like a secure file store, cloud secure storage? And a lot of times that happens through third-party systems as well. And so then, right, as we're using that data, how are we protecting it? Right? Is there somebody behind me that can see all of my personal information that shouldn't? Right? Are you doing this at a Starbucks? Right? There are a lot of state regulations that say that you have to have a secure location when you are processing loan files. And so, right, doing this at a Starbucks is not protected. Also, right, if you're connected to a public Wi-Fi, people can intercept that data, and so data in use is not protected at that point, which ruins the confidentiality and potentially the integrity of that data. And then when you are done with that data, are you storing it for 15 years or indefinitely? Are you hitting certain standards to say after 12 months or whatever the regulations are requiring, we are destroying this data? It differs state to state, country to country, region to region even. And so making sure that we're applying that data destruction to that policy. I don't want to find out that 30 years from now, some of my data is still being stored somewhere for no reason. And so that destruction of the data is very, very important. Moving on from there, choosing the right technology, right? This helps hit all the prior points throughout this presentation, right? Do you have the right technology for asset management? Is it identifying systems throughout your organization consistently and bringing it into your database? Are you protecting your systems with the right endpoint detection and response tools, which is now a requirement for most cyber insurers? Do you have the right antivirus on your systems? Is it logging correctly? Is it being managed? Right? Do you have next generation firewalls that are doing active protection of data across your environment? Are you logging all of this data into what we call a security information and event monitor, or a SIM, right? So that you can correlate that data or aggregate that data, correlate it, and then identify anomalies, right? I mentioned earlier, if there's hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of gigabytes or terabytes leaving your environment at a time, can you identify that? That's typically an anomalous behavior, and you want to be able to identify that and respond to that. And that is what a SIM can help you do. It can help identify if there are attacks happening on different aspects of your network as well. Identity and access management solutions. Do you have single sign-on, which is allowing your employees access to resources throughout your environment by logging into a portal that's typically behind multi-factor authentication, MFA? One of the newer concepts is passwordless authentication. This is typically for your consumers or your customers, right? Rather than having them remember passwords, they log in with their email address and then it sends them a login link to a secure known good source like their email, their phone, whatever it might be, so that they can log in from there rather than having their password stolen. And then vulnerability management. What tools are you using to understand the technical weaknesses and vulnerabilities inside your environment? And then how are we managing data across our environment? There are data loss prevention tools. Microsoft and Google both have their own integrated tool sets, but there are also other tool sets that you can utilize to help classify data and then prevent, say, social securities from being sent in plain text or automatically encrypting those. And are we using those right technologies inside of our environment that makes sense for our needs? As we already talked about a little bit, access control and identity management. Are we implementing the principle of least privilege, only giving access to the data that you need, not the most convenient to just give access for, managing it for internal users, contractors, and third parties? Do we have onboarding and offboarding policies and procedures? I often see organizations have onboarding policies, but they don't really have the offboarding policies and they don't audit them. And so as you are maturing your program, making sure that when employees are leaving the organization through whatever means, that you are following offboarding processes to make sure that they don't maintain access to data, they don't have access to systems, or even contacts within the organization, that those are severed correctly at the time of offboarding. Multi-factor authentication is a requirement for cyber insurance now. There's not a single cyber insurer out there that I have seen that is not requiring this across all public-facing resources. And if you don't know what multi-factor authentication is, I'm sure we've all had to utilize this once or twice in our life. It is when you log in and then a text message is sent to you, or you have to find a 6-digit code on your phone, or you have to have a specific USB key, or whatever it might be, some other form of authentication to validate that you are you entering into your organization's resources. And this is because passwords have been proven to be a non-secure source. They get stolen all the time. People do not set strong passwords, or they reuse passwords across multiple resources, right? There was a period of time where when I would talk to an individual and say, is your Facebook password the same as your bank password, the same as your Google email password or Hotmail password or Yahoo password or whatever it is? And the answer is typically yes, or it's a very close variation of the same password. And that is a very known thing in the cyber world, right? And people utilize that all the time, but it makes it very easy to pivot to different resources across the board. So is your corporate password the same as your personal bank account, as the same as your Facebook? If one of those gets hacked, can I hack the rest of your resources? And so one easy way to overcome this is to utilize a password management tool, like a LastPass or a Dashlane, right? I'm not advertising for any of them. There are a handful out there that are really great tools, and they all require multi-factor authentication and more than one, even more than 2 factors of authentication to utilize that. And then you can use unique, strong passwords across the board. There are a couple of resources here. How secure is my password at security.org, haveibeenpwned.com, right? You can utilize these resources to see if your email addresses have been hacked in the past, or if you think you have a secure password, you can test it against this. And you can also search passwords to see, like past passwords, to see if they have been a part of data breaches at haveibeenpwned.com/passwords. When we do talk about passwords, we want to talk about the complexity of those passwords. And so there's a company out there called Hive Systems, hive.io, that has done a lot of research on what it takes to easily break a password. And so we talk about complexity, right? If you have a password that is 18 characters long, but it's just numbers, that would take the average sophisticated attacker about 3 weeks to crack and break in, because there's not a lot of options there, right? 18 characters, it's all numbers. There's only so many variations it can be. And so if we utilized a computer to run through all of these, we would understand that would be about 3 weeks. But right, take a more sophisticated approach to this. And if your password is 12 characters and it includes numbers, upper and lowercase letters, and symbols, right, you're looking at 12 years is about 12 characters is about 3,000 years to crack. And so you've got a little bit of time on that password, right? Like if we're all expecting to live that long, that's great, but right, you could utilize that password for a while without it being actually stolen or easily guessed, I guess is the or brute force is the terminology there. So right, when we talk about complexity, it is vitally important to actually utilize stronger passwords that include all of these things and different passwords for every resource, which is where those password managers come into play. So you can have different 18-character passwords that exist of different numbers, letters, upper and lowercase, and symbols, and then you're at 438 trillion years before somebody can brute force that password on average. So educate, train, and learn is the next, and I'm running out of time and I'm just at the end here. One of the most important things to do in an organization is to train and educate your staff to identify cyber attacks via email or anomalies on their computers. Utilizing automated security awareness is a great way to do that. You can also do webinars, right? We host these webinars to train as well, so feel free to sign up for these as we continue to have these throughout the year, and then validate the effectiveness of your training through phishing simulations, and other types of things. Right, and this is again the number one entry point I mentioned earlier, and I'll go to this hilarious meme. Right, you can have all the correct systems in the world: defense in depth, patch systems, monitoring, compliance and auditing, and an experienced IT security team. But if a user clicks on an email, it's game over, right? And so we've seen this in two attacks, right? Most recently, the big Uber attack that happened in the last couple of weeks was because a user was called and phished and gave out a password, and that led to a huge breach for Uber. So, right, it doesn't matter what we have if we're not training our staff, we're not protecting them. There is a cheat sheet in here. I'm not going to go over that. 4 resources that you can utilize to educate yourself inside of your industry. Some sample policies. This will be coming out as a part of this. And then some key takeaways, right? Cyber attacks are on the rise and have been on the rise for years. So focus on maturing your organization cybersecurity program through strategy and visibility. Preparing for a cyber attack greatly reduces the impact of an attack. Staying vigilant, being suspicious of any emails is a great way to really do that, right? Were you expecting email? Is the language odd? Things along those. And then cybersecurity is a journey, right? It takes time, right? You're not going to be secure tomorrow, right? You're going to have to initiate this journey. And then lastly, utilize your trusted advisors to help assist you in that cybersecurity journey in any way possible. And then I'll open it up for Q&A here. And post my contact information. If you have any questions, you want to reach out personally, feel free to email me or call me. And from there, I'll take a couple questions. If there are any, feel free to chat those across. I know we only have a couple minutes before the top of the hour here. All right, so it doesn't look like there are any questions that were chatted across. However, feel free to send me questions to my email here. I will reply typically within 24 hours is my MO, unless I'm on vacation or something like that, but I have a whole team that can help answer any of those questions. And again, you will be getting this deck within the next 1 to 2 business days, as well as this recording. But I just want to thank you all for attending. Remind you that this is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and those resources I shared within this deck can help promote and build a stronger cybersecurity strategy across your organization. So again, thanks for attending and have a wonderful rest of your week.